Paging awesomeness, Swifter! We're about to work with the UIPageViewController. We're going to learn how to create and configure a UIPageViewController. We'll create functions to create new view controllers to use as pages. We'll learn to use the setViewControllers method to programmatically move to a specified view controller or page, and we'll implement methods to navigate with left and right swipes. Let's get swiping! Alright, Swifters, let's get our app a-flippin'. We're going to add a UI page view control that allows us to swipe right and left to transition through all of our weather locations. We can still tap the list button and work with weather locations in the table view, but tapping a given location will return to that location and allow us to resume flipping left and right at that location. If you go all the way to the end, either left or right, the flipping stops in that direction. You see we sort of go up against a flipping wall. It bounces back a little bit with kind of a rubber band action, and we're at the end of the line. Now, the one thing we're not going to add in this video are these little dots down below that show your location in the list of different pages, but we'll add that in the next video. So let's go ahead and build this. So we're going to be adding a UI page view control to our storyboard, and like the UI navigation controller, we don't add items directly to the object on the storyboard, but unlike the UI navigation controller, we are going to be creating a .swift file and coding for this UI page view controller object. So here's our list of useful questions to ask ourselves when we're working with a new feature in iOS. Do we need to import libraries for the UI page view controller? No. Now the rest of these items will all go inside of that Swift file we're going to create for our UI page view controller. So do we have a data source and delegate? Yup. We've seen those concepts before when we work with a UI table view control. Now this usually means you got a protocol. Do we have protocols? Yup, we do. And again, like UI table view control, we've got one that's named delegate and we've got one that's named data source. We'll set these up in an extension and Xcode will add the stubs. These are two methods to handle swiping left and swiping right. View controller after gets the view controller after the one that we're looking at when we swipe right to left, and view controller before gets the one before the one we're looking at when we swipe left to right. Anything else? Yep. In our code, we need to write a function to create a new instance of the list table view controller. So now this is the page that holds our weather information for a particular location that the page view controller is showing. So each time we select a location, either by flipping left or right, or by clicking on something within the table view, we need to create a new instance of the page. Now we'll also implement an Apple method for page view controllers called setViewControllers. This will allow us to immediately jump to a particular view controller. We'll use this to show the first location in our list of weather locations when we open the app, and we'll also call this method when we click on a particular weather location in a list of locations in the table view, so we show that one right away. So let's code. So inside of your WeatherGift app, click plus to open the library, search for PageViewController. It'll be the one inside of a golden circle. Drag this onto your storyboard. I'm going to place mine just above my Location DetailViewController. This PageViewController is going to be the initial view controller. So when the app opens up, we're going to start here, find in the attributes inspector this is initial view controller selection, click that, and you should see the inbound arrow now heading into the new UI PageViewController object. Next, find the transition style attribute. So it by default is select to page curl. That makes the swiping look like you're curling through the pages in a book. That's not really the look we're going for. So why don't we pull down on this menu and select scroll instead. Now we'll need a Swift file to code up the logic for our UI page view controller. And since this is the first of my regular view controllers, I'm thinking that because it's going to show up first, I'll just put it at the top of all of my view controllers. The location isn't important, but I'm going to right click on weather location to create the file just below it. I'm going to select new file, Cocoa Touch class, make 100% sure that you're selecting the class type as UI Page View Controller. I'll name this class Page View Controller. Click Next, click Create, and you can clear out any of the green comments in here that you don't want. Just make sure that you're not deleting any of the curlies. So now that we've got this file, let's return to the main storyboard. Make sure that your UI Page View Controller is selected. Head to the Identity Inspector, under Class, select the file we just created, that Page View Controller file, and we've just linked the object to our .swift file. So now let's return to the PageViewController.swift file and start coding. Now we need to set the delegate and data source. We'll do this right in view.did_load. It's a little bit different than how we did it in the table view controller. We're going to say self.delegate equals self and self.data source equals self. We're just saying that any of the code to handle the PageView controller is going to be inside this PageView controller file itself. So now let's add an extension. We'll do that below the very last curly in this class. We'll say extension, PageViewController, that's the name of this class, colon, then we're adopting two protocols here. So I'm going to type in PageViewController delegate and press return. That'll pull up UI PageViewController delegate, comma, and then PageViewController data source, return. That'll pull up UI PageViewController data source, open and close curlies. Xcode will say, do you want the stubs? And we will say, stub me. Now these two methods are required by one of the protocols above. You need them to handle swiping. So ViewController before handles a swipe left to right by returning the ViewController before the one you're looking at. And this method ViewController after gets the one after the one you're looking at when you swipe right to left. We'll code those up in a bit. Now up next, we need to write one of our own functions that's actually going to create an instance of a location detail view controller. That's the one that shows the weather. And once we've created this function, we'll be able to call it whenever we want to see a view controller with a new weather location in it. So we'll do this inside PageViewController.swift. So return to that file and we'll code right underneath viewDidLoad. We'll say func. And this is one of our functions, so it's not going to show up in code completion. We'll give it the name create location detail view controller, lower camel case, since that's what we're going to do, create a new location detail view controller, open parens. Now the convention here is to use an argument label and a parameter name. So we'll say for page lower camel case, this is the name that's going to show up as the argument when we call the function. And we'll follow this with a space and then the word page, colon. Page is going to be the name of the parameter, the constant that's used inside the body of the function that we write below. So we don't necessarily need to do this with the argument name and the parameter name, but you'll see most programmers do this for readability, especially in this context when you're creating a new view controller. Now the page is an int, so we'll type int after the colon. And we're going to be returning a view controller, so let's put an arrow after the close parentheses, and specifically we're going to be returning a view controller of type location detail view controller. So enter that and open and close curlies. And then this is how we programmatically create a new view controller. So we'll say let, and we'll give the constant the name of the controller we'll create. We'll just call that detail view controller, lower camel case, equals, and then we refer to storyboard, which is our main storyboard here. So this is a variable that iOS will know about. You see, we get a description here in code completion. Exclamation point dot, and I'll start to type in instantiate, and you'll see a bunch of different methods down here. The one that we want is this instantiate view controller with the identifier as a string, so just that one parameter. And you can see code completion says creates the specified view controller from the storyboard and initializes it using your custom initialization code. That's what we want. Press return to accept this. Now what's the identifier? Well, just in the same way when we did table view cells, we gave them identifiers, and sometimes when we use segues, we give them identifiers too in the main storyboard. That's how our code can refer to those specific objects. We need to make sure that this view controller has an identifier as well. So let's check this over in main storyboard. Make sure you selected your location detail view controller, and the identifier is in a different place. So it's not in the attribute inspector. It's going to be in the identity inspector, which is probably showing right now. And I'm just going to give it the same storyboard ID or the same identifier as my class name. So I'm just going to highlight the class name up here, copy it with Command C, paste that into storyboard ID, and then use this name, which is still on the clipboard, to return to PageViewController.swift and paste it between my double quotes. Now this command creates a generic UI view controller, and just as in situations where we needed to access variables when we did prepare for segue or an unwind segue, we're going to need to downclass this so that we can specifically get at the properties that are specific to the location detail view controller. So we'll say as exclamation point location detail view controller. And now on each location detail view controller, what we're going to do is we're going to take the page number that we're creating, that we're passing in as a parameter here, and we're going to set a property on this page that keeps track of the location index. So that's just which number in the array of weather locations are we currently looking at. So we'll say detail view controller dot location, and we haven't yet created this property yet. That's why I'm not seeing a location index in code completion. So let's go back over to location detail view controller. And another thing that we're going to do is we're going to move the master list of weather locations into our page view controller, because that's the first view controller that shows up, so that's a good place to put that. So I'm going to highlight this property in here that's inside of location detail view controller. I'm going to cut that with a Command X. We'll move that in just a bit, but let's create this location index property here, and we'll just type var location index equals 0. So I'm initializing this at the point of declaration, but we'll change this value anyway in the code we're about to write in PageViewController. So now let's return to the PageViewController, and we're going to paste in the property that we just cut out of the location detail view controller. So under the curly, right under the class definition, Command V. So we've just declared and initialized an empty weather locations array. We'll go down to Create Location Detail View Controller. Now I'll do a quick Shift Command K to make sure that Xcode knows about the property we just created. And I'll backspace just a little bit and start to retype location index. And sure enough, now Xcode knows about that property we just created. Press return to accept it, and we'll say that equals page. So again, whenever we create a location detail view controller, we're going to pass in a page, which is going to be the index in the list of weather locations in that array of the individual element in the array that we're looking at. And that's going to let Location Detail View Controller find and display the name for that location, access the longitude and latitude that we saved for that location, and eventually to get the weather for that longitude and latitude. And so that's it. We've just created a Location Detail View Controller. We have set up its location index as the page value we passed in. So now let's just return Detail View Controller. So by writing the function createDetailViewController, we allow the PageViewController to create new location detail view controllers, so new pages. When we first run our code, PageViewController needs to set up the first page, that'd be page 0. So we'll call this ViewController creation function that we just created from viewDidLoad. And we'll do this using setViewControllers. Now setViewControllers is an iOS method, so this is something Apple gives us. The first parameter that it wants is an array of ViewController. So why an array? Well, most of the time when we set up PageViewControllers, we're viewing a single page or a single view controller. But if you've ever seen an app that shows 2 pages at a time, the best example of this is iBooks that looks like the pages of a book. Well, those are actually 2 different view controllers that are showing. And this is done by passing in 2 view controllers as an array of view controllers, and it shows something like a spine in between them. Now, we're not going to do this. Most of the time, you won't have something with a spine showing 2 view controllers, but the function still wants an array. So if we pass it in an array of just 1 view controller, it won't show a spine. It'll just show us 1 view controller representing 1 page. So we still have to pass in the view controller that we're creating, and we'll do it within brackets. Now, inside these square brackets, what we're going to do is we're going to put in a call to the function that we just wrote, create location detail view controller. So we're saying, hey, create a new view controller and then set that up by going to that view controller right away. So it'll just go to the 0 with 1. And since this is the first one, what we're going to do is pass in the page value as 0. Now the other 2 parameters for the set view controllers, we won't need to animate it, so we'll put false in there, and we won't need a completion handler, so we'll say nil. Now we don't need this setViewControllers function when we swipe left and right. We have different functions. Those are those stubs in our extension that we'll eventually use to create new location view controllers, but we will also call this setViewController function when we return from the location list. That's the list of all the weather locations in the table view, and we'll do that so that we can jump directly to a given location. So if you want to programmatically move to a given view controller, meaning page number, then we'll use this setViewController method to handle the swipes. We'll use the before and after functions. So now let's code this. Back in PageViewController.swift, inside of our viewDidLoad, after our delegate and data source have been declared, we can access this Apple function setViewControllers. Look what code completion says. It says sets the view controllers to be displayed. Note view controllers, there's no singular, but we'll just pass in an array of 1 view controller. That'll work fine. And to do that, we'll do square bracket, close square bracket, and in between the square brackets, we need to create a view controller. So we're going to call this create location detail view controller function that we just wrote. And for the page parameter, we're going to put in a 0 because this is going to be the very first weather location that we show. Then we'll tab over for the rest of the parameters in setViewController. The direction will be .forward. The animation will be false. We don't need to animate this move. And for completion handler, we'll put in nil. Now let's head down to our extension where we've got the stubs for the before and after methods that handle the swipes. And these are iOS methods. So iOS calls these whenever a swipe on a page view controller occurs. Now for this ViewController method, we get a ViewController parameter passed in from the function. We'll make sure that we get the current ViewController. So we'll do this by creating a constant using ifLet. We'll make sure that we can downcast the ViewController to a location detail ViewController. Then if that works, and it should, we'll check to make sure that we're not at the first ViewController. That's the ViewController at location index 0. If we are, then we can't swipe left to right. There's no ViewController before this one. So what we'll do is we won't go through the if curlies and we'll just return nil. But if it is true, if there is a view controller to the left or before this one, then we'll return a newly created view controller that we create using the function create location detail view controller that we just wrote, and we'll make sure that we pass in the page that's 1 less than the current view controller's page since we're swiping left. That'll give us the location index before the one we're looking at. That sets up exactly what we want from a swipe left to right. Now this after function below this handles the swipe from right to left, and so we want to set up the view controller after the one that we're looking at. So the function is just the opposite of the one above. We still use if_let to make sure that we can get a current view controller and we can downcast it as location detail view controller. This time we're going to check to make sure that the location index isn't the last weather location in the list. Now that would be the index value that it'd be the same as weather locations.count -1. That would mean we're looking at the last possible weather location in our list, so we can't swipe one after, so we'll return nil. But if not, then we're going to create a new view controller, one to the right. That'd be the location index for the page that we're looking at +1, and we'd return that. So that's it. Let's set this up. So the first function that you see on screen here is this view controller before function. So right inside of the curlies, I'm going to say if let current view controller equals view controller. So that's the view controller that's being passed in here as question mark. So we're going to downcast that as capital location detail view controller open and close curlies. Then inside we use another if statement to check to see if there is a view controller before. So we say if current view controller dot location index, remember we're keeping track of that, is greater than 0. Then we do open and close curlies. And if it is, we're going to return a view controller that we create using create location detail view controller, that function that we just wrote, for the page at the current view controller's location index -1. So that'll give you the one just before that. Now this will be the positive case here, so in either case where either of the ifs fail, what we'll do is just before the last curly in the function, we'll put return nil. Now we'll fill in the code for the after function. It's going to be really the same that we had up here. So we'll say if current view controller, and you know what I'll do is actually I'm just going to copy the code that I typed in above just to show you how similar this is. I'll paste it down below. Just double check your curlies to make sure that you don't have an extra curly or one curly less than you need. I always do Command A, select all, Control I, indent, and double check to make sure that the indents match. If they didn't, I'd probably be missing a curly, and I'd probably also see an error in Xcode. Now, we're still going to go ahead and we're going to create the view controller and downcast it as a location detail view controller. Then we'll take a look at that view controller's location index. But now we're looking to see if it's the last view controller, which would mean that instead of being greater than 0, it would be less than weather locations.count -1. Then what we're going to return is a creation of the new view controller, but instead of current view controller.location -1, it's going to be current view controller.location +1. So remember, we moved the weather locations array over to our page view controller. That's where our app starts. And when the app starts, we want to load in all of our locations that we had saved to user defaults. Now, we used to do this in location detail view controller. So let's cut out the load locations function there and put it in the page view controller. And in this way, the page view controller will be our reference point for finding all of the weather locations that we're keeping track of. So let's go into Location Detail View Controller and find the Load Locations function, highlight the entire function, and Command X to cut it out. Now we'll get a bunch of errors. We call this function up in ViewDidLoad, so find where Load Locations is being called in ViewDidLoad and delete that as well. Now we'll deal with these errors in just a bit, but first let's go ahead and finish off the Load Location function. So we'll go to PageViewController.swift. Why don't we paste Load Locations in right underneath ViewDidLoad, because that's where we'll eventually call this from. And then if you think this through, this first statement up top is a guardlet that checks to make sure that we can read data in from user defaults. Now, if not, we print a warning and return nil. And remember, we said that this is a warning, not an error, because the first time we run the app, there won't be anything saved in user defaults. So we're going to end up here because we've never run the app before and the user hasn't typed in any weather locations. But if this is the case, then we also want to make sure that we create a first element in our weather locations array. Otherwise, we're going to have nothing to display and we're going to run into an index out of range error. So normally what we'll do is that very first element will be the user's current location. We'll just put in a dummy value right now. So if we get down here just before the return, that means we've got nothing in user defaults. So what we'll do is we'll add our first location to weather locations by saying weather locations dot append, and then in parentheses it'll say the type name, upper camel case weather location, open parentheses, and for the 3 parameters we'll put in current location, all in caps, and then I'll just, any latitude or longitude that you make up is fine. I'll say 2020 and 2020. And then above this, I'll just put in a to-do. I'm not sure if I'll do this here or some other location, but I'll say to-do, get user location for the first element weather location. So eventually what we're going to do is put in the user's location here as the first value. We're not going to have this bogus latitude and longitude in here. Now, if I saved user defaults to the device, I should always have at least one element in my weather locations array. But just to be on the safe side, why don't we have a condition in here in case we get down here and we read in a file that has no weather locations in it, but it is a valid data file. So what we'll do is we'll just copy this line here that says weatherlocations.append, and then I'll check to see if there is something in the array just before the last curly in the function. I'm going to say down here, if weatherlocations.isEmpty, that means is the count of the number of elements in the array 0, then I need to append this first value to weatherlocation. So I'll open and close curlies, then I'll take what I copied up here from weatherlocations.append, paste it down below. Again, I'm just going to make sure that there is at least one element in the array. And I'll put another copy of the to-do comment down below because I'll need to get the current location here too. Now we want to make sure that we set up our user interface in Location DetailViewController so that it shows the information for the correct element that we've selected in our array of weather locations. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're storing weather locations in a property in PageViewController. So that's our source of truth on all of our weather locations. And that's a good place to store it since that's the parent view that's going to control all of the individual child DetailViewController views, the different pages. So we need to do this updating of the user interface inside of Location DetailViewController since that's where our user interface code is. So what we're going to do is inside of our update user interface code, we're going to refer back to our PageViewController. We're going to look at its weather locations array, that property. We're going to find the array element at the location index that we're storing inside of our Location DetailViewController, and then we'll use this value to set a current weather location so that we can update our user interface. Now the one tricky part here is that we don't have a simple way to refer back to the PageViewController, but we can write code to find the first view controller in the stack of view controllers that we've created in our app. So that's this code here. That first view controller is called a root view controller. So we'll write this line of code. That'll allow us to create a local PageViewController constant, and then we can use this to refer to the array property inside of it, get the element that we need at the current location index, and we're good to go. So let's head back to Xcode. And oh yeah, in PageViewController, we also have to make sure that we call load locations from our viewDidLoad function. So I'll just paste it in here. We'll do that just before we have our setViewControllers function call. So we make sure that we have some data before we set up that first view controller. Then let's switch over to Location DetailViewController. And Xcode gives us a hint where all of these errors are, where the code is that we need to fix. Now let's skip that first error for now, and we'll go down into Update User Interface. And this is where we're going to set up a constant that points to the PageViewController, which is our root view controller. So we're going to say let PageViewController equal. Then the code is a little convoluted, but you can repeat this whenever you need to get at that first view controller or the root view controller. So you're going to say UI application, those first three letters are in caps, .shared .windows, and you see it in code completion right here. That's an array of windows. It says the app's visible and hidden windows. Accept this by pressing return. .first exclamation point. So that's going to get the first element in this array of windows. .root view controller, and you can see it says the root view controller for the window. So essentially this says, look at all the windows in the app, find the root view controller for that first window. That's going to give us the page view controller, and we're going to create a constant from that. Now we need to get at this view controller's property, so we need to make sure that we downcast it using as exclamation point page view controller, the name of that class. Then underneath that, we're going to set our weather location property. And remember, we still have a weather location property in our location detail view controller. We declared that up top as a class-wide property. We'll say weather location equals page view controller, the constant we just created that points to the page view controller, dot weather locations, and then in brackets, we'll pass in location index, which is the current index or the current position of the current page in our array of pages. Now we also need to deal with the prepare for segue and our unwind. So first the prepare for segue. When we segue, we're going to be opening up the location list view controller. So we need to make sure that we pass into this view controller the current list of weather locations. Now remember, that's in our page view controller. That's our source of truth. So we're going to use this line that we just wrote where we create a constant page view controller from the root view controller, and we'll use that to get the weather locations from the page view controller and pass those into the segue destination, which is the location list view controller, which has the table view in it. So back in Location Detail View Controller, hey, we got this line of code that we're going to reuse. So why don't we highlight this first line in Update User Interface, the one that creates a new page view controller, copy that with a Command C, then go down to Prepare for Segue. Then right under this line where we find our destination, we create a destination constant, let destination. I'll press return and we'll paste in that line we just copied. Now remember, we used to store weather locations in this view controller, but we don't anymore. But now we can just type in front of this page view controller dot, because that's now the home of our weather locations, and that can accurately refer to weather locations and make sure that it's passed to the destination, which is that location list view controller. Cool, so now let's deal with our unwind function where we're doing that exit segue. So now here in the unwind, we're going to be doing the opposite. If we come back from the location list view controller, then we might have changed the weather locations. We might have modified this source of truth, maybe by adding a weather location, deleting locations, moving the locations around. So we'll use the same line that we just reused, this one where we create a PageViewController constant that points to the PageViewController, and then we'll use this to update the weather locations property in the PageViewController from the source's weather location. Remember, the source here is where we're unwinding from. That's the location list view controller with the table view. Now there's one more thing that we're going to need to do. For the segue to run, the user clicks on one of the weather locations, so like the name of a city or some other location. And so we want to make sure that we move to the page for that weather location, and then we update the user interface to reflect that location. So to move to a page, we use the same function in PageViewController that we used in ViewDidLoad, and that's this one here, setViewControllers. And this is used to position the current page of the current view controller. When we first started, we positioned the first page at page 0. So here we're going to do the same thing. We're going to call that same function, but instead of passing in a 0, we're going to pass in the location index, which we also get from the source, which is the index of the cell that the user clicked on. So I'll highlight this line that we just reused in Prepare for Segue, the Let PageViewController one, and copy that with a Command C. It looks like this line is out of alignment, so I'll just do a quick Command A, Control I to re-indent. But remember, we've got to update our location index. So let's make sure down here in our unwind function, right underneath where we have our let source and we get our source value, press return, and make sure that you've got location index equals source.selected location index. Remember, that grabs the index of whatever value the user clicked on in the table view controller and passes it over here. Underneath this, we're going to paste in what we just copied from above. That's our let page view controller line. So now that we have the page view controller line, in the line below that, we're not updating weather locations in this view controller. We're going to update weather locations in page view controllers. So instead of typing, I'm just going to copy page view controller up here, this constant we created, paste it in front of weather locations and put a dot after it. So now we have PageViewController.weather locations that we're updating from the source. We've just updated the source of truth that we keep in our PageViewController. Then I'm going to delete this line below where we update weather location. We now do this inside of our updateUserInterface, and we do it by referring to the source of truth. So let's just delete this line, but this is where we also need to put in our setViewControllers line. So here we'll type in PageViewController.setViewControllers. Remember this method here that's associated with PageViewControllers. Press return to accept it. And remember, even though we're going to create a single view controller, we need to pass in an array. So we'll put brackets in here for the first parameter. And then inside the brackets, we're going to call that method createLocationDetailViewController. But remember, it's in our PageViewController. So we've got to say PageViewController.createLocationDetailViewController. Then tab over the for-page parameter here is going to be locationindex, which we just got up above. And the direction can be .forward, animated can be false, and completion can be nil. Now let's head up to ViewDidLoad. That's where we have our last error. So we can just get rid of this whole if statement because this was previously a check to make sure that we didn't have a nil for our weather location, but we already do that check now inside of our page view control. So we can just highlight the if and everything between its curlies and press delete, but make sure that you leave in the update user interface call at the end of ViewDidLoad. And let's go ahead and build and run. Oh, you know what? We get a couple of warnings in here. And again, it isn't vital that we do this, but inside location list view controller, inside some of the code that we copied from Google, there were 2 deprecated functions. So let's go over and we can just delete those because we don't need them anymore and we won't get this warning. Now let's build and run. And here we go. Build successful. Do we have page view? Current location, Creighton, Gonzaga, MIT, San Francisco State, Boston College. What if we click on the list? We see them all in here. Can I jump to Creighton automatically and then swipe to go to the current location? What if we edit and move stuff around? Does the order now reflect this? Have we updated our source of truth? Let's move Boston College up top. Let's move MIT to the end. We click on MIT. We're at the end. We scroll all the way. We see Boston College is in that second location where we put it. Looking good. Click on San Francisco State. This is all fantastic. Swifter, you just implemented a pretty complex page view control. You learned a lot of new concepts. Hope you're feeling good about your skills. We still need these little dots down below. Those are called the page control. We'll add those in the next video. Keep at it.